She thought no one was watching when her fingers hovered too long over my champagne flute. I smiled, switched the glasses, and let the music swell. Minutes later, as she lifted her glass for the wedding toast, a doctor's voice cut through the laughter with a single devastating question. The ballroom shimmered like something borrowed from a dream. Crystal chandeliers spilled honeyed light over white roses and polished silver, and every surface seemed to glow with approval. Laughter rose in gentle waves, glasses chimed, silk brushed against silk. It was the kind of evening people describe as perfect, in a voice lowered with envy. I should have felt untouchable. Instead, my gaze kept drifting to her. Margaret, my mother-in-law, stood near the champagne tower like a queen surveying her court. Her pearl necklace rested against her collarbone with calculated grace. She was smiling, but it was the tight smile of someone tolerating a minor inconvenience. Me. Earlier that morning, she had kissed my cheek and whispered, "Welcome to the family, dear," with the warmth of a refrigerator light. I'd told myself it was nerves. Weddings do strange things to people. But then I saw it. She reached for my glass, not in the casual, helpful way of a hostess adjusting place settings. Number. Her body shifted just enough to shield the movement. 2 fingers dipped into her clutch, a flick of the wrist, a pause that lasted half a second too long. Something slipped into the pale gold liquid. My heart didn't pound. It dropped, heavy and precise, like a gavel striking wood. Around us, violins swelled. Guests clapped as the photographer directed my husband, Daniel, to pull me closer for another shot. I smiled for the camera, but my eyes never left Margaret. She was already stepping back, smoothing her dress, satisfied. What had she put in it? A prank? A sedative? Something worse? My mind raced through possibilities, each more absurd than the last, and yet her composure told me this wasn't impulsive. This was planned. I could have confronted her. I could have raised my voice, created a scene dramatic enough to rival the fireworks scheduled for later. But something colder and steadier took hold of me. If she wanted a performance, I would give her one. When Daniel leaned in to whisper, "You okay?" I squeezed his hand and nodded. "Just overwhelmed," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. He kissed my temple, already being summoned by another relative eager for a photo. Margaret's gaze flicked toward me, brief, assessing. She expected me to drink. Instead, I turned to the catering table under the pretense of adjusting my veil. The servers were busy replenishing trays of sparkling water and champagne flutes. With a calm I didn't know I possessed, I set my glass down beside another identical one. Then, lightly, deliberately, I switched them. No one noticed. The music shifted to something brighter. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room as the master of ceremonies announced the wedding toast. Margaret straightened immediately, chin lifting. Of course, she would insist on speaking first. She approached the center of the ballroom with the elegance of someone who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. Guests quieted. Forks rested against porcelain. Daniel slipped his arm around my waist, unaware that the night had tilted on its axis. Margaret picked up the glass, the one that had been meant for me. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. If she felt uncertainty, she hid it well. "My dear friends," she began, her voice smooth as lacquer. "Today we celebrate love, unity, and the joining of 2 families." A murmur of approval circled the tables. She lifted the champagne slightly, the liquid catching the chandelier light like molten gold. And that's when I saw him move. From the back of the ballroom, near the emergency exit, a man in a dark suit stepped forward with quiet urgency. I recognized him vaguely, one of the guests on Daniel's side. A distant cousin, someone had mentioned earlier. A doctor, if I remembered correctly. His eyes weren't on the bride and groom. They were locked on the glass. Margaret continued speaking, her words flowing like silk ribbon. "Trust," she said, emphasizing the word. "Trust is the foundation of any strong marriage." The irony was almost beautiful. The doctor's pace quickened. A strange tension crept across his face, subtle but unmistakable. Not alarm, yet, but calculation, as though he had just solved a problem no one else realized existed. Margaret raised the glass higher. "To my son and his—" "Excuse me." The interruption wasn't loud, but it sliced cleanly through the air. Every head turned. The doctor stood just a few feet away now, gaze sharp, voice controlled. "Who served these drinks?" Silence spread across the ballroom like spilled ink. Margaret's smile faltered, just slightly. And for the first time that evening, she looked unsure. If I had taken a single sip, none of this would be unfolding. And if he hadn't stepped forward at that exact second, something far worse might have. What the doctor saw in that glass would change everything. The silence didn't break all at once. It fractured. A fork slipped from someone's hand and clattered against porcelain. A chair leg scraped. Somewhere behind me, a nervous laugh tried and failed to exist. The chandeliers still glowed warmly overhead, but the room had turned cold. Margaret's fingers tightened around the stem of the champagne flute. "I beg your pardon?" she said, her tone polished, though something brittle trembled beneath it. The doctor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority, when real, rarely shouts. "I asked," he repeated calmly, stepping closer, "who served these drinks?" Daniel shifted beside me. I felt the change in him, confusion sharpening into alertness. "Is something wrong?" he asked. The doctor's gaze flicked to me, then to Margaret's glass. "There may be," he said carefully. "I noticed a particulate dispersion in that champagne." The phrase sounded clinical, almost detached, but the word particulate echoed like a dropped stone. Margaret let out a light laugh, too light. "Surely you're not suggesting—" "I'm suggesting," he interrupted gently, "that this drink should not be consumed." A ripple ran through the guests. Conversations began in hushed bursts. My pulse was steady now, almost eerily so. The storm had moved outside of me. Daniel turned to his mother. "Mom?" Margaret's composure began to show hairline cracks. "This is absurd," she said, lifting the glass slightly as if to prove its innocence. "It came straight from the catering table." I stepped forward before I could second-guess myself. "That's not the glass I was handed," I said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement placed delicately in the center of the room like a fragile ornament. Margaret's eyes snapped to mine. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. The doctor extended his hand. "May I?" After a moment that stretched like pulled silk, Margaret surrendered the glass. He held it toward the chandelier light, turning it slowly. Even from where I stood, I could see it now. A faint, cloudy swirl near the base, subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. And he had been. "I'm not making conclusions," he said evenly. "But this needs to be tested." "For heaven's sake," Margaret said a little too quickly. "It's champagne." "Exactly," he replied. Daniel's arm slipped from my waist. He looked at me, not at his mother. "What aren't I understanding?" The room seemed to lean closer. I met his eyes. "I saw your mom reach into her clutch," I said quietly. "She touched my glass." Margaret's face flushed, not dramatically, but enough. "That is an outrageous accusation," she snapped, abandoning her earlier sweetness. "I adjusted your napkin. You were flustered. Honestly, you've been nervous all day." There it was, the pivot. Paint me unstable before I could paint her deliberate. The doctor glanced between us, reading the emotional temperature with professional precision. "Let's keep this factual," he said. "No one needs to escalate." But it had already escalated. One of the catering staff stepped forward, pale. "Ma'am, we didn't add anything beyond the standard pour." Margaret rounded on him. "Are you implying—" "I'm implying nothing," the doctor said firmly. "I'm recommending a simple solution. We preserve this glass and have it analyzed." Preserve, analyze. Words that belonged in laboratories, not ballrooms scented with roses and vanilla cake. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "We test it." Margaret's composure cracked fully then, not into panic, but into indignation. "You're choosing to humiliate me at your own wedding?" she demanded, eyes glistening. "Over paranoia?" The guests shifted uncomfortably. Sympathy began to tilt toward her. After all, she was the mother of the groom, a respected woman, a benefactor to half the charities represented in the room. And I was the newcomer. I felt the weight of that imbalance pressing against my ribs. "I didn't say you did anything," I replied, keeping my voice level. "But if there's nothing in it, testing it protects you too." That landed. Margaret hesitated, because refusing would speak louder than any accusation. The doctor nodded subtly, as if acknowledging a strategic move. Daniel looked between us, torn. "Mom, if it's nothing, then this ends here." The air thickened. Margaret forced a smile that no longer reached her eyes. "Fine," she said. "Test it. I have nothing to hide." But her hand trembled when she set the glass down, and that tremor told me more than any confession could. The wedding planner, red-faced and whispering urgently into her headset, tried to restore normalcy. "Let's just take a short intermission," she announced brightly. "Refresh your drinks, everyone." No one moved immediately. "Colleague tonight," he said. "We'll have colleague tonight," he said. "We'll have preliminary results by morning." Morning, my wedding night had just acquired a laboratory appointment. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Why would anyone do this?" he murmured. Margaret's eyes met mine again, and for a fraction of a second something flashed there. Not fear, calculation, as if she were already considering her next move. The orchestra, uncertain, began playing again, softly, hesitantly. Conversations resumed in cautious clusters. But the magic of the evening had fractured beyond repair. I had switched the glasses to protect myself. Now I wondered if I had exposed something much larger. If the test confirmed what the doctor suspected, this wouldn't just be an awkward family misunderstanding. It would be public, legal, irreversible. And if it came back clean, then I would be the villain who accused her on the most important day of her son's life. By tomorrow, one of us would lose everything. You won't want to miss what those results reveal. If you were in my place that night, would you have stayed silent or done the same? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. If you believe trust should never come with a warning label, hit subscribe and stay with me for what happens next. And if you've ever felt that something wasn't right, even when everyone else smiled, share this story with someone who needs that reminder. Morning arrived without softness. Sunlight filtered through the tall hotel windows, pale and indifferent, as if it had not witnessed anything the night before. The bridal suite, still scattered with hairpins, half-empty perfume bottles, and the abandoned heels of a woman who had expected only joy, felt strangely unfamiliar. I hadn't slept. Daniel stood near the window, staring down at the quiet city below. His posture had changed overnight. Not broken, not distant, just recalibrated. "Mom called," he said without turning around. The words didn't surprise me. The tone did. "And?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. She says she feels humiliated, that she can't believe we allowed a spectacle. Allowed, as if the spectacle had organized itself. I wrapped my robe tighter around me. The air conditioning hummed steadily, too cold for a June morning. Or maybe it was just me. Did she deny touching the glass? I asked. Daniel hesitated. She said she adjusted your napkin, he repeated carefully, and that you've been under a lot of stress. There it was again, fragility as a weapon. I moved toward the small table where my untouched wedding bouquet rested in a crystal vase. The roses were already beginning to soften at the edges, petals curling almost imperceptibly. Beautiful things deteriorate quietly. My memory is clear, I said. I know what I saw. Daniel finally turned. His eyes weren't accusing. They were searching. I'm not saying you're wrong, he replied. I just need this to make sense. So did I. A knock interrupted us. 3 sharp raps, not hesitant, not apologetic. Daniel crossed the room and opened the door. The doctor stood there, composed as ever, dark suit immaculate despite the early hour. He held a small insulated container in one hand and a slim folder in the other. I won't take much of your time, he said calmly. My pulse steadied, not quickened. Whatever was inside that folder had already shifted the ground beneath us. This was simply confirmation. Daniel stepped aside to let him in. The doctor placed the container on the table with careful precision. I delivered the sample immediately after the reception, he began. Preliminary toxicology screening was conducted overnight. Toxicology. The word felt clinical and heavy, like metal. And, Daniel asked. The doctor opened the folder. There was a sedative compound present in measurable quantity. The room did not explode, it contracted. I didn't gasp, I didn't speak. The confirmation moved through me like cold water, clarifying, undeniable. Daniel blinked once. A sedative? Yes, a mild benzodiazepine derivative. Not life-threatening at that dosage, but significant enough to impair cognition, balance, and memory. Memory. My wedding night. Fogged, fragmented, possibly erased. Daniel ran a hand over his face. Are you certain? I am. Silence expanded between us. The doctor's tone remained steady. Given the setting, I strongly recommend this be formally documented. Documented. That word felt even heavier than toxicology. I met his gaze. You mean reported? Yes. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Reported? To who? Hospital administration has already logged the lab results. If you choose to pursue it, a formal complaint can be filed. It becomes a matter of investigation. Investigation? The roses on the table seemed suddenly too red. Daniel turned toward me slowly. This can't be a misunderstanding. No, I said quietly. It can't, because champagne doesn't grow sedatives on its own. The doctor closed the folder. I'll give you privacy, but understand, this isn't merely a family dispute anymore. It's a documented attempt to chemically alter someone without consent. Consent! The word echoed louder than the others. After he left, the suite felt smaller. Daniel paced once, twice. Why? He whispered, not to me, but to the air. I thought of Margaret's smile, the way she emphasized the word trust, the tremor in her hand, control. That had always been her currency. Maybe she wanted to make me appear unstable, I said carefully. Imagine if I'd slurred my speech during the reception, or stumbled during the dance. Daniel's jaw tightened. People would have blamed nerves, I continued, or too much champagne. Or perhaps they would have whispered that the new bride couldn't handle the pressure. He stopped pacing. She would never, he began. But the sentence couldn't survive the evidence. because she had. And now the decision stood before us, stark and unavoidable: report it and fracture his family publicly, or bury it and live with the knowledge that silence protected the wrong person. Daniel's phone buzzed. Margaret's name lit up the screen. We both stared at it. He didn't answer. Not yet. Outside, the city carried on as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Traffic moved, people sipped coffee, life progressed. But inside that room, a legal line had been crossed. And once a line like that is crossed, it doesn't fade, it waits. The next move would define not just our marriage, but the story everyone would eventually hear. Daniel let the phone ring until it stopped. The silence afterward felt deliberate, not accidental. A choice. "She knows," I said quietly. He didn't ask what I meant. He understood. Margaret had always been highly attuned to perception. If the doctor had filed even a preliminary lab log through hospital administration, word would travel faster than gossip at a wedding reception. Daniel picked up the folder again and reread the toxicology summary as if the text might rearrange itself into something gentler. "It says administered substance," he muttered. "That wording matters." "It does," I replied, "because administered implied intent." Another buzz, a message this time. Daniel glanced at the screen, his jaw tightened. "She wants to come over." Of course she did. Control the narrative, contain the damage, reframe the facts. I straightened my posture instinctively, even though I was still in a robe and barefoot on polished wood floors. "Let her," I said. An hour later, Margaret entered the suite as though stepping onto a stage. Perfectly dressed, hair immaculate, makeup subtle and precise. She carried herself not like someone under suspicion, but like someone prepared for negotiation. "My son," she began warmly, ignoring me for a beat too long. "I can't believe this has spiraled so dramatically." Daniel didn't move to hug her. "That depends on your definition of dramatic," he replied. She sighed softly and turned toward me with controlled sympathy. "I'm so sorry if there was a misunderstanding." There it was, the word again. "Lab results aren't misunderstandings," I said evenly. Her eyes flickered just once. "I've spoken with our family attorney," she continued smoothly. "Before you let this become something irreversible, I suggest we consider how easily lab samples can be contaminated." Daniel's expression changed. "Are you implying the hospital fabricated it?" "Not fabricated," she corrected, "but mishandled. These things happen." The confidence in her tone was almost impressive. Almost. I stepped toward the table and opened the folder myself, laying the pages flat between us. "The sample was sealed in front of multiple witnesses," I said calmly. "Logged within an hour, reviewed overnight." Margaret didn't look at the paper. She looked at Daniel. "You're really going to let her push this?" she asked softly. "After everything I've done for you?" There it was, the pivot from denial to emotional leverage. Daniel's voice remained steady. "Mom, did you put something in that glass?" Silence, not defensive, not outraged, measured. "I adjusted her napkin," she said again. She was trembling. I almost smiled at the irony. "I wasn't trembling," I replied. Margaret's composure thinned. "You were overwhelmed. You've been anxious for months. It wouldn't surprise me if you imagined—" "Enough." Daniel's voice cut through the room sharper than the doctor's had the night before. Margaret blinked. "You keep suggesting she's unstable," he continued, "but the lab isn't." A faint crack formed in her posture. For the first time, she looked cornered. "You don't understand the implications," she said, voice lowering. "If this becomes formal, it won't just affect me, it affects the family name, the business, the board." Ah, there it was. Not shame, not regret, reputation. Daniel absorbed that slowly. So you are worried. I am concerned about recklessness, she snapped. I met her gaze directly. This doesn't have to be public spectacle, I said quietly. But it does have to be documented. Margaret's mask slipped, just a fraction, and in that fraction, I saw calculation collapsing into fear. You would involve the authorities? She asked, disbelief sharpening her tone. If necessary, Daniel answered before I could. The room stilled, because this was no longer about wedding drama. It was about accountability. Margaret's eyes flicked toward the window, then back to us. You're making a mistake, she said. You're choosing her over your own mother. Daniel didn't hesitate. I'm choosing the truth. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Margaret's shoulders straightened. The vulnerability vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Very well, she said coolly. If you insist on escalating this, I will respond accordingly. Not apology. Not confession. A warning. She turned toward the door with dignified precision, pausing only once. You may find, she added without looking back, that pursuing this opens doors you're not prepared to walk through. Then she left. The suite felt quieter than before, emptier but somehow clearer. Daniel exhaled slowly. She's afraid, he said. Yes, I replied. Of what? Losing control. He nodded once, resolute. Then we document it. In that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Because this wasn't revenge, it wasn't retaliation, it was procedure. And procedures, unlike emotions, leave paper trails. Margaret believed influence could smooth over consequences. She was about to discover that documentation doesn't bend easily. Filing the report felt strangely anticlimactic. There were no flashing lights, no raised voices, just paperwork, signatures, calm voices explaining procedures. The hospital's internal compliance office documented the toxicology findings formally. A copy was forwarded to legal authorities as a matter of protocol. Protocol. Such a simple word for something that quietly rearranges power. Daniel sat beside me the entire time, not hovering, not dramatic, just present. When the compliance officer asked if I wished to make an official statement, I answered clearly, steadily, recounting what I had seen. The clutch, the movement, the switch. Facts only. No embellishment, no speculation. Margaret, of course, responded through counsel. Her attorney requested an independent review of the lab findings. It was granted. Transparency protects everyone, they said. I agreed. A week later, the independent analysis confirmed the same sedative compound. Measured, intentional, not accidental contamination. By then, the social consequences had begun to ripple outward. Margaret did not host her usual charity luncheon that month. A board meeting was quietly postponed. Whispers, I was told, circulated in rooms I had never entered, and likely never would. But something else happened too. People started calling me. Not reporters, not gossips, women. An employee from one of the family's partner firms requested coffee. She spoke carefully at first, then more freely. She described subtle intimidation, moments where dissent was met with quiet punishment. Reputation had long shielded behavior. Until now. I listened. I didn't fuel the whispers. I didn't speculate. I simply directed them toward the same advice I had taken. Document, report, follow procedure. Sunlight works best when it's steady, not explosive. Margaret maintained her innocence publicly. She never admitted fault. But the investigation, formal, structured, impartial, moved forward with calm inevitability. Daniel changed too. Not hardened, clarified. I used to think strength was loyalty at any cost, he told me one evening as we walked past the river near our apartment. The city lights reflected in the water like scattered constellations. Now, I think it's being willing to look at something uncomfortable and not look away. I squeezed his hand. Our wedding photos arrived around that time. In one frame, Margaret stands mid-toast, glass raised, smile perfectly composed. No one looking at that photograph would guess what was suspended inside the champagne. It almost made me laugh, because the image captured her certainty, not the outcome. The formal findings concluded 2 months later. While the evidence did not escalate into criminal charges due to the dosage and lack of consumption, it established attempted non-consensual administration of a sedative at a public event. Civil consequences followed, board resignations, public statements about personal matters, quiet restructuring within the family business. Margaret's influence didn't vanish overnight. Power rarely does. But it shifted, permanently. She never apologized to me directly. Instead, a carefully worded letter arrived from her attorney expressing regret for distress caused by misunderstandings surrounding the event. I framed it, not out of spite, out of clarity. Because the greatest shift wasn't in public perception, it was in our home. Trust between Daniel and me deepened into something sturdier than romance. It became partnership, tested, examined, chosen. One evening, months later, Margaret attended a small family gathering, smaller than usual, quieter. She greeted me politely. No icy undertones, no theatrical warmth, just distance. And for the first time, I saw what she truly feared that night in the ballroom. Not scandal, not humiliation, loss of narrative control. She had built a life on managing appearances, on shaping rooms with confidence and influence. But documentation doesn't care about appearances. And truth, when handled calmly and legally, doesn't need to shout. At my wedding, she tried to make me fade softly into the background of my own story. Instead, she handed me something far more powerful. Proof. And proof, once written, does not dissolve like champagne bubbles under chandelier light.